Hey, welcome to Sleepy Old World. I'm really glad you're here tonight. Before we begin, just one small thing. If this channel has become part of your nights, if the voice and the stories and the unhurried pace of it feel like the right way to end a day, would you consider subscribing? And if tonight's story stays with you, a like means more than you might think. It takes 2 seconds and it helps keep this little corner of the internet going. No pressure at all. Do it when it feels right. Dim the lights if you can. Pull your blanket up. Get truly, properly horizontal. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight. A bedroom in Florida at 11 at night. A sofa in Ohio just past midnight. I read every single one, and there is something I find genuinely wonderful about that. All these different people, in all these different places, choosing to settle in at the same time and hear the same story. All right. Are you comfortable? Good. Let's go. Picture this. It is the evening of November the 14th in the year 1888. You're standing on the platform of Grand Central Depot in New York City, and the air smells of coal smoke, wet stone, and the particular metallic sharpness of iron that has been heated and cooled and heated again 1,000 times. The platform lights are gas mostly, with a few of the newer electric lamps installed near the main entrance, and they cast pools of amber and pale white across the brick in ways that do not quite agree with each other. Your trunk has already been loaded. A red cap took it 20 minutes ago with the quiet efficiency of someone who has done this so many times that the motion has become a kind of invisible choreography. The train stands at the platform the way large things in the 19th century tend to stand, not parked, not waiting, but present. Patient in a way that suggests it has all the time in the world and you do not. This is the Pullman Limited, westbound from New York to Chicago. Your journey will cover 960 miles through the dark and cold of a November night, through Pennsylvania and Ohio and Indiana, through river valleys and small coal towns and long stretches of flat land, where the only light visible from the window will be a farmhouse lamp, yellow and solitary, there and then gone. The train is unlike anything most people in this era have ever seen up close. George Pullman, who began his career as a cabinet maker in upstate New York, and who would eventually become one of the most powerful and most despised industrialists in American history, designed the sleeping car around a single radical proposition. He believed that the American traveller deserved to sleep as well on a moving train as in the finest hotel bedroom in the country. This was not a modest ambition in 1865 when he first introduced his sleeping cars to the public. Rail travel at that time meant wooden benches. It meant draughty, smoke-filled coaches where passengers sat upright through the night, dozing in whatever position the hard seat and swaying motion allowed, waking sore and cold and covered in the particular film of coal dust that settled on everything within reach of a steam locomotive. It meant arriving at your destination exhausted in a way that was not just physical, but something close to existential. Pullman looked at this and decided it was unacceptable, and more importantly, he decided that the gap between what travel was and what it could be represented an extraordinary commercial opportunity. So he built something else, entirely. Your car tonight is called the Adirondack. They all have names like this, the Pullman Palace cars, names of mountains and lakes and rivers, names that evoke a particular kind of American grandeur. The Adirondack is 83 feet long and weighs nearly 100,000 pounds. When it moves, it does not rattle. It hums. There is a difference, and you will feel it the moment the train begins to roll. You step up onto the platform at the rear of the car and a porter is there immediately. He's a tall man with a very still face, and he's wearing a dark blue uniform with brass buttons that have been polished so recently you can see yourself in them. A little, if you lean close. He takes your ticket, glances at it, and says, with a formality that is warm without being exactly personal, "Good evening, your berth is number 7, upper. If there is anything you need during the journey, please do not hesitate to ask." He steps aside to let you pass, and you enter the Adirondack. The first thing is the warmth. Not the brutal, suffocating warmth of a wood stove crammed into a small space, but something measured and even, radiating from the small heating apparatus at each end of the car. The second thing is the light. The Adirondack runs electric lights at night, one of the features Pullman has been introducing to his newest cars throughout the mid-1880s, and the overhead fixtures cast a steady warm glow across the interior that gas lamps never quite managed. The third thing, and this one takes a moment to absorb, is the wood. The interior of a Pullman Palace car is panelled in hand-finished hardwood. This particular car uses cherry panelling on the main walls, with inlaid ebony trim along the window frames. The ceiling is painted cream and decorated at the edges with a stenciled border in gold and burgundy. The carpet underfoot is a deep wine red, with a pattern of intertwined geometric shapes that the Pullman Company's design department has been refining for 15 years. The seats, which are upholstered in dark green plush velvet, are arranged facing each other in pairs on either side of the aisle, and they are wide enough that two people of average build can sit side by side without touching. The curtains at the windows are a heavy brocade in gold and green. This is not a train car. This is a room that happens to be moving. You find your seat. The woman across from you is perhaps 55, travelling with a young woman who might be her daughter, or might be a companion, it is difficult to say, and she's reading a novel with a red cover that she holds at an angle suggesting she's already well into it. She does not look up when you sit. This is correct behaviour on the Pullman. There is an entire grammar of not looking on these cars, a precisely calibrated set of social distances and polite non-acknowledgements that make it possible for 20 or 30 strangers to share a space for 16 to 18 hours without it feeling like an imposition. You will learn this grammar quickly because the people around you already speak it fluently. The train begins to move. There is no lurch, no shudder, nothing like the jarring starts of lesser rolling stock. The Adirondack simply begins to roll, slowly and then with gathering steadiness, and the platform lamps outside your window start to drift backward, and then the lights of the depot, and then the lights of the city itself begin to string and pull, and finally dissolve into the dark as the train slides north along the Hudson before turning west. Let me tell you something about the social world you have just entered. The Pullman Palace car in 1888 is one of the most interesting social experiments in American history, and almost nobody describes it in those terms. What Pullman created was not simply a comfortable way to travel. He created a sealed world with its own hierarchy, its own rules, its own codes of conduct, and its own very specific distribution of power and comfort. And if you were riding in a sleeping car in 1888, your experience of that world depended almost entirely on who you were, where you were sitting, and whether the name on your ticket was the kind of name that appeared in newspapers. The Pullman Company was, by 1888, operating nearly 3,000 cars on railroads across North America. The company did not own the tracks or the locomotives. It owned the cars and it leased them to the railroads along with the service, which is to say, along with the porters. A train might be operated by the Pennsylvania Railroad or the New York Central, but the sleeping car attached to the back of it, the one with the velvet seats and the polished wood, and the porter waiting at the door, that was a Pullman car staffed by Pullman employees, operating under Pullman rules. The rules were extensive. Passengers riding first class, which is to say passengers who had paid for a berth in a sleeping car, had access to a set of services that were, by the standards of 1888, genuinely remarkable. The porter was expected to make and unmake their beds, to bring them blankets and pillows, to take their shoes at night and return them shined in the morning, to fetch newspapers and books from the supply the car carried, to bring them drinks from the club car, to wake them at whatever hour they requested, and to generally be available at all hours of the night and day. The bell cord at each berth ran directly to the porter's end of the car. A passenger who wanted anything at 2 a.m. pulled the cord and the porter came. The porter slept when he could. This is the detail that the glossy advertisements for Pullman travel, the ones showing elegant women in evening dress and men in top hats gazing out at moonlit rivers, never quite managed to include. The luxury of the sleeping car rested on a foundation of nearly continuous labour performed by men who were paid so little that they depended almost entirely on tips to survive. A Pullman porter in the late 1880s earned somewhere between $12 and $20 a month in base wages. The expected tips, the ones the company relied on in its internal accounting, were supposed to bring the total to a reasonable income. But tips were never guaranteed, and some passengers tipped nothing at all, and the porter worked regardless. The men who held these jobs were almost exclusively black men, most of them formerly enslaved, or the sons and daughters of formerly enslaved people. This was not a coincidence. George Pullman made a deliberate decision in the years immediately after the Civil War to staff his sleeping cars with black men, and his reasoning was both economic and deeply cynical. Freedmen were, in the immediate post-war years, desperate for employment. They would accept wages that white workers would refuse. And there was another element that Pullman and his contemporaries understood very clearly, even if they did not always say it directly. White passengers, particularly white Southern passengers who were increasingly using the train to travel, were more comfortable being served by black men than by white ones. The dynamic of servant and served was, for many of these passengers, most legible when the servant was black. Pullman was not creating a new social order. He was packaging an old one inside a palace car and selling it at a premium. The porter who welcomed you to the Adirondack tonight, the man with the brass-buttoned jacket and the polished shoes, his name is not George. His name is something else entirely, something specific and real, and belonging to him alone, but you will probably not learn it. And this, I think, is one of the things about the Gilded Age that you need to sit with for a moment before we go any further into the luxury. The luxury was real, the food was extraordinary, the beds were, by the standards of any period, genuinely comfortable. The craftsmanship of the cars was meticulous and beautiful in ways that photographs do not quite capture. All of that is true, and running underneath it, supporting it the way a foundation supports a beautiful house, was a system of labor extraction and racial hierarchy that the people sitting in the velvet seats preferred not to think about. Many of them managed this quite successfully. We will come back to this. There is more to say, and the night is long. Right now, though, let us inhabit the experience. Let us see it and hear it and smell it the way a passenger in 1888 would have encountered it, because the Pullman experience at its best was something genuinely extraordinary, something that people who had travelled on one of these cars talked about for the rest of their lives, and understanding why requires being there, at least a little. The train is about an hour out of New York now. You are running north through the Hudson Valley, and outside your window the river is a wide dark shape between the hills, catching the moonlight in thin moving strips. There are stars visible between the clouds, a clear November sky that is cold and enormous beyond the glass. A few passengers have already begun the elaborate and somewhat intimate process of converting their seats into sleeping berths. This happens in stages. The Pullman sleeping car in 1888 uses a system of upper and lower berths that Pullman himself invented and patented decades earlier. During the day, the berths fold up and lock into the wall and ceiling, leaving the car configured as a standard passenger saloon with facing seats. At night, the porter converts them. The lower berth is formed by folding down the backs of the facing seats until they meet in the middle, creating a flat platform that is then made up with a mattress, sheets, pillow, and blanket. The upper berth folds down from the ceiling on a system of hinges and hooks, creating a second sleeping platform above the first. Each berth, upper and lower, is then enclosed by heavy curtains that run the full length of the car on a rail, creating a row of what amount to small fabric rooms, each perhaps 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, stacked 2 high, running along each side of the aisle. The lower berth is more expensive, and for obvious reasons. It is easier to access, requires no climbing, has slightly more headroom, and offers more convenient access to the window. The upper berth is cheaper, requires the use of a folding ladder that the porter provides, and involves lying perhaps 5 or 6 feet above the floor of the car, with the ceiling of the car another foot or so above your head. The upper berth is not exactly claustrophobic, but it is not exactly not claustrophobic either. It depends on the person. Your berth tonight is upper 7, which means that when the time comes, You will climb a small folding ladder and sleep closer to the ceiling of the Adirondack than to the floor. From up there you will be able to hear the sounds of the car below you, the soft voices of late-reading passengers, the footsteps of the porter, the occasional creak of the car shifting on the rails, and through the window beside you, you will be able to see whatever the night outside is doing. If you are the kind of person who finds small enclosed spaces comforting, the upper berth is very nearly perfect. If you are not that kind of person, the night may be long in a different way than you anticipated. The porter is making his rounds now. He has changed into a white jacket over the blue uniform, the standard service attire for the evening hours on a Pullman car, and he moves through the car with the unhurried, deliberate efficiency of someone who has done this particular sequence of tasks so many times that it has become something close to muscle memory. He stops to speak briefly with the woman with the red book, nods, makes a note on a small card he carries in his breast pocket. She has asked to be wakened at 6 in the morning. He will not forget. He never forgets. He has 12 berths on this car tonight. 11 passengers, 1 berth empty. He knows each one, knows which ones tipped well in the past and which ones will not tip at all, knows which ones are prone to calling at odd hours and which ones, once settled, will sleep straight through to Chicago. He knows because this is his job and because his income depends on his knowing everything that is going to be needed tonight before the people who need it have thought to ask. There is a woman in berth 3 who is travelling alone for the first time, nervous in a way that is not quite visible but is audible in the pitch of her voice when she asked about the lighting schedule. He has already identified the lamp she will leave on through the night, and he will not suggest she turn it off, because that is not his job, and because she should be allowed to sleep however she needs to sleep. There is a man in lower 2 who told him, before boarding, that he has a bad back and needs the mattress positioned in a particular way. He has already arranged this. This attentiveness, this nearly clairvoyant attention to the comfort of the passengers, was one of the things Pullman porters became famous for throughout the late 19th century and well into the 20th. People who rode the Pullman cars regularly spoke of the porters, the way they spoke of excellent hotel concierges or family butlers, with a particular warmth and appreciation that was, depending on the passenger, tinged with various degrees of genuine respect and various degrees of its absence. The porter was, for most passengers, the human face of the Pullman experience. He was the one who made the journey feel like something other than just crossing a country. He was the one who made it feel, if the word is not too strange, like being taken care of. What the passengers generally did not think about because it was not comfortable to think about was what the porter thought of them. There is a memoir by a Pullman porter who worked the New York to Chicago run in the early 20th century, and in it he describes a quality that the work required that he calls the face. The face was not a lie, exactly. It was more of a professional surface. It was the expression that communicated attentiveness and warmth and willingness to help without communicating anything at all about the interior life of the man wearing it. The face was the product of years of practice and, beneath the practice, a kind of self-discipline that the passengers who benefited from it never had occasion to think about. The cost of the face, the energy it required to maintain it through a 16-hour run, while sleeping perhaps 3 hours and answering the bell at 2 in the morning for a passenger who wanted a glass of water. This cost was never factored into the price of a Pullman ticket. It was simply assumed. But we are here tonight in November of 1888, and the train is moving, and the dining car has opened for dinner service, and whatever the full weight of this history is, there is also food. Let us go get something to eat. The dining car on a Pullman-appointed train in the Gilded Age was, by any reasonable standard of comparison, astonishing. Not good for a train astonishing, simply astonishing. The chef, and there was a chef, a trained professional cook who had been hired and approved by the Pullman Company, worked in a kitchen that occupied perhaps a third of the dining car at one end, a kitchen that was, let's be honest about this, smaller than the kitchen in most comfortable homes, a kitchen perhaps 12 feet long and 6 feet wide, equipped with a coal-fired range, a small oven, and a preparation surface that was used and reused throughout service with the organized frenzy of a man who has learned to cook in a space roughly the size of a large wardrobe. From this kitchen, on a moving train at somewhere between 35 and 50 miles per hour, he would produce a full multi-course dinner service. The menus from the Pullman dining cars of this period survive in various archives, and they are extraordinary documents. A typical dinner service in 1888 might begin with an oyster soup, fresh oysters, or as fresh as could be maintained in the ice storage beneath the car. This would be followed by a fish course, often broiled trout or fried lake perch, with a lemon butter sauce. Then a roast, typically standing rib roast of beef or roast leg of lamb, carved to order at the table. There would be vegetables, usually 2 or 3 preparations, creamed potatoes, stewed tomatoes, possibly fresh green beans if the season and the icebox allowed. A salad course would follow, and then dessert, which might be ice cream, yes, ice cream, served on a moving train in the 1880s, maintained in the car's ice storage, or perhaps a Charlotte Russe, or individual baked Alaska, or a selection of fresh fruit. The whole thing would be accompanied by bread rolls baked in the dining car kitchen that morning, still soft in the middle. This is not a simplified account. These are the actual menus, the actual food served on these actual trains. The dining car itself was fitted out to match the sleeping cars in a general way. Mahogany paneling, white linen tablecloths changed between each service, silver plate cutlery, good china, small cut glass vases on each table with a single flower. The tables seated 4, and the stewards seated parties together when the car was full, which meant that on a busy night you might find yourself eating standing rib of beef across from a stranger who might be anyone at all. A politician traveling to a constituent meeting in Chicago, a cattle rancher returning west from a financial negotiation in New York, a doctor, a journalist, a merchant, a woman traveling to visit her son who had moved to Chicago for business and was doing, she would tell you, very well indeed, which was why she could afford this train. Social mixing in the dining car was both enforced by necessity and moderated by elaborate courtesy. The enforced intimacy of being seated with strangers was handled by the same grammar of polite non-engagement that governed the sleeping car, deployed in a slightly more challenging environment because here the situation was literally a shared table. The rules were understood. You did not discuss money, politics, or religion. You did not ask personal questions. You commented approvingly on the food, observed the darkness outside the windows, possibly mentioned the weather at your departure city, and speculated pleasantly about the weather at your destination. If the conversation went well, you might exchange the kind of biographical information that was entirely uncontroversial. Your profession in the most general sense, your city of origin, your destination if you did not mind sharing it. You did not pursue any topic further than the other person seemed willing to go. You finished your meal at roughly the same pace as the people across from you, because leaving too early was abrupt, and staying too long after finishing was something else, a kind of imposition, a lingering. You thanked the waiter who cleared your plate. You returned to your car. The waiters in the dining car were, like the sleeping car porters, almost exclusively black men, again by deliberate Pullman Company policy, again paid partly in tips. The dining car steward who managed the service and kept the books and coordinated between the kitchen and the floor was typically a man of some experience and considerable organizational skill, because running a restaurant service for 40 or 50 people at a time on a moving train required a level of operational precision that the casual observer enjoying the white tablecloths and the silver cutlery would not necessarily have suspected. The price of a first-class berth on the New York to Chicago route in 1888 was approximately $2 on top of the regular train fare. The regular fare for the journey was around $20, which was not a trivial sum. The combined cost of the journey with berth and dining car meals would run a passenger perhaps $25 to $30, which in 1888 represented several weeks of wages for a skilled tradesman. The Pullman car was not designed for ordinary Americans. It was designed for a specific stratum of American life, and that stratum was very aware of this. The club car, which some Pullman configurations included on longer runs, was a smoking car for men. Not smoking permitted, smoking required, in the sense that this was the space designated for it, the space where men retired after dinner to smoke and drink and conduct the kind of conversation that was considered inappropriate in mixed company. On the New York to Chicago run in 1888, the club car might hold a dozen men on a busy night, sitting in leather armchairs and talking about business and politics and the newspaper, filling the car with cigar smoke and the warm smell of bourbon or brandy, and outside the windows the darkness coming at them at 40 miles an hour, unchanged, indifferent, enormous. Women did not go to the club car. This was not a rule exactly, not written down anywhere. It was simply understood. The Pullman car operated on a system of understandings of this kind, invisible fences maintained by social pressure rather than physical barriers. Women who travelled first class on the Pullman had access to a small dressing room at one end of the sleeping car, which held a wash basin and a mirror, and was large enough for one person to change clothing barely if they arranged themselves carefully. Men had a similar dressing room at the other end. These were the only truly private spaces on the car, and they were small and in constant demand. The question of privacy on the Pullman sleeping car is one that the company's advertising material solved simply by not addressing it. The advertisements showed the berths with their curtains drawn and implied, without saying it, that within those curtains was a small and complete private world. What they did not show was the other 18 passengers in their own curtained berths on either side of a narrow aisle, some 6 or 8 feet from you in any direction. They did not show the sounds, which were considerable and continuous. The snoring, particularly, was a common subject of complaint in letters and diaries from Pullman travellers of this period. One woman, travelling from Boston to Chicago in 1891, wrote in her journal that the man in the berth across the aisle from her sounded like, and she took a moment to find the right comparison, a steam engine that has not been properly maintained. She lay awake for 4 hours listening to it, she wrote, and arrived in Chicago feeling exactly as though she had not slept at all. The curtains on the berths extended to the aisle on a rod, creating a corridor of fabric. The aisle itself was very narrow, perhaps 2 feet wide, and when the berths were made up on both sides there was barely room to pass through without brushing the curtains. The porter, moving through the car at night to answer the bell or check on a passenger, moved through this narrow fabric corridor in practiced silence, not the kind of forced silence of someone trying not to wake people, but the trained silence of someone who had learned that passengers prefer to believe they are the only person present, and that this belief, however disconnected from physical reality, contributes measurably to the quality of their rest. Your berth is ready now. The porter made it up while you were at dinner. You returned to find the car transformed, the daytime arrangement of seats replaced entirely by the double row of curtained sleeping cells, the overhead lights turned low, the car quiet in the particular way that a space becomes quiet when it is full of people who are all simultaneously pretending not to be there. You find your berth by counting along the aisle, and you pull back the curtain and look in. It is small. This is the first thing, genuinely, honestly small. Not cramped in the way of a bad budget hotel room, but small in the way that is specific to sleeping cars. The way of a space designed with extreme precision to contain exactly one human body in a horizontal position with just enough margin on all sides to roll over. The mattress is narrower than a twin bed. The pillow is a single pillow. The blankets, there are 2 of them, heavy wool in the Pullman burgundy, are folded back in the way of a well-made hotel bed. The sheet beneath them is white linen, turned down at the top. There is a small reading lamp at the head of the berth, a tiny thing on a bracket, with a switch. The window is beside you, and through it the night is going past at 40-some miles an hour, and the reflection of the small lamp floats in the glass above whatever is outside, so that you can see the faint glow of a town or a farmstead, and your own lamp at the same time, superimposed. You climb the folding ladder. It is easier than it looks, but requires a certain commitment. Once you are in, you pull the curtain closed, and the world beyond it reduces to a strip of light at the top and a strip at the bottom, and the sounds coming through the fabric from the aisle. You lie back. The mattress, which looked thin from outside, is more substantial than you expected, the kind of construction that gives slightly and then holds, not soft and sinking but not hard either. The blankets are genuinely warm. The pillow has been laundered and pressed. It smells clean in the specific way of things that have been washed in very hot water with strong soap and then dried in moving air. Not perfumed, not chemical, just clean. The way clean things smell when nothing has been added to the cleaning. The car is moving. You can feel this less than you can hear it. A low rhythmic sound that is not quite a rocking but is something like one. The wheels on the joints of the rail, every few seconds, a click that becomes by repetition a kind of music. There are researchers who have studied train sound specifically for its sleep-inducing properties, and what they find is that the rhythm is close enough to a human resting heartbeat, repeated steadily and without variation, that the brain interprets it as a signal that the body is already at rest, already safe. You will probably be asleep before you intend to be. Most people are, but let's stay awake a little longer, because there is more to see. It is 9:30 in the evening and the car around you is settling. Voices in the aisle grow infrequent. Someone coughs once and does not again. The woman with the red book is presumably still reading. Her light is on, a faint glow at the edge of her curtain. The man in lower 2, the one with the bad back, shifted once and was still. The train is running through Pennsylvania now, somewhere south of the Delaware Water Gap, and the hills outside the window are dark shapes against a slightly lighter sky, and occasionally there is the pale slash of a creek catching the moonlight before it is past. The porter is at his small fold-down seat at the end of the car, near the vestibule door. This is where he spends the night, or where he is supposed to be when he is not answering the bell. The seat is perhaps the width of a kitchen chair. There is no berth for the porter, no bed, no mattress, no provision for horizontal rest. The company's position on this was straightforward. The porter was working. He was always working. Working meant being available. Being available meant not sleeping. If he could sleep briefly in the chair, between calls, that was his own private good fortune. If he could not, that was also his private matter. The standard shift for a Pullman porter on a long-distance run was from the time the car was boarded, typically an hour before departure, until the train reached its final destination and was cleared of passengers. On the New York to Chicago run, this was approximately 19 to 20 hours. In the years before the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the union organized by A. Philip Randolph in 1925, after a decade of organizing effort, there was no formal maximum. Porters worked until the run was complete. They were paid for time in service, but the service included all the time the car was in motion, whether they were actively performing a task or not, and the gap between what the pay schedule recognized as work time and what the porter actually experienced as an unbroken stretch of demanding alert attention could be considerable. I want to stay with this for a moment because there is a temptation, when describing the Gilded Age Pullman experience, to let the luxury perform a kind of moral sedative. The cars are beautiful, the food is extraordinary. The whole thing is genuinely impressive as a feat of industrial design and organizational hospitality, and all of that is true. The luxury is real, and the system beneath it is also real, and the two things exist simultaneously, and the people who paid for their tickets in 1888 were, most of them, aware of the second thing at some level and found it possible to set that awareness aside in ways that are, from this distance, both entirely understandable and worth looking at clearly. The porter's name, if you asked him, was Thomas. He was 34 years old. He had grown up in Georgia, the son of a man who had been enslaved before the war and who had moved the family north to Baltimore in 1871 when Thomas was 3 years old, because the violence in Georgia in the years immediately following emancipation had made staying dangerous in a way that required no elaboration. Thomas had found work with the Pullman Company in 1881 when he was 27 because the Pullman Company was one of the few employers in the country at that time who was actively hiring black men for work that paid a wage, even a small one, that could be supplemented by tips and that came with a degree of stability, a regular run, a regular schedule, something like a career. By 1888 he had been on the New York to Chicago run for 4 years and knew every mile of it. He knew which stretch of track, just past Pittsburgh, caused a particular resonance in the car that woke light sleepers if they were not already asleep. He knew how long the water in the heating boiler at the Chicago end of the car would stay hot in November temperatures, and adjusted the schedule of his check-ins accordingly. He knew which passengers were going to be difficult before they said a word to him, because the body language of a passenger who is going to be difficult is distinct and readable, and Thomas had been reading it for years. His mother was alive and living in Baltimore. He sent her a portion of every paycheck. He also sent a portion to his sister, who was raising 3 children and whose husband had died 2 years earlier of a fever that a better paid man might have survived more easily. Thomas read, on his own time, in the rooms he rented in Chicago, where he kept a small library of newspapers and books because reading was something he had taught himself in his 20s and had refused since then to give up. He had views about politics, about the situation of black Americans in the post-Reconstruction South, about the labor movement that was beginning to make noise in industrial cities across the country. He had read Frederick Douglass. He had read the newspapers that covered the organizing efforts in the Chicago stockyards. He thought carefully about all of it, in the hours when he was not on the train, and when he was on the train he wore the face, the professional surface, and answered to George when passengers called him that, and said yes sir, and of course ma'am, and moved through the car with the practiced quiet efficiency that was his job, and that he was very good at. None of this is in the Pullman advertisements. The train is somewhere in Pennsylvania now, the mountains beginning to flatten as you move west. You have been rocking in your berth for perhaps an hour, not quite sleeping, in that specific state of bodily rest and half-alert consciousness that a moving train produces. The sounds of the car have settled into a kind of pattern. The wheel clicks at regular intervals, the distant sound of the locomotive through the forward cars, a very occasional soft sound from a neighbour in a nearby berth, settling or shifting. Outside your window, the dark is absolute in the way that the countryside at night in November is absolute. No light at all between the occasional farmhouse lamp and those visible only briefly before the distance swallows them. The air in your berth is warm and slightly close, not unpleasantly so, just the warmth of a heated space with heavy curtains drawn. The wool blankets are heavy in a way that is comforting rather than oppressive, a particular weight that seems to hold you rather than press down on you. The mattress beneath you has achieved that state of complete familiarity that mattresses reach after perhaps an hour of occupation, when the body has stopped noticing it because it has mapped its contours and found them acceptable. Your pillow is cool on the side you are not lying on and exactly warm enough on the other side. These are small things. They are also the things that determine whether a night is comfortable or not, whether sleep comes or whether it doesn't, and on the Pullman car in 1888 they were calibrated to produce sleep as reliably as possible, because a passenger who slept well arrived at their destination in a frame of mind that made them a return customer. George Pullman understood this. He understood the mathematics of comfort in a way that was both genuinely visionary and almost entirely mercenary, and the combination was precisely what made him successful. He wanted you to sleep well because you sleeping well was good for business. That this required the labour of Thomas, who was not sleeping, was a detail he did not particularly dwell on. Let us slow down here and talk about what the train is doing to the landscape it passes through, because this is something that the passengers inside the velvet curtains were mostly not watching and mostly not thinking about. And it is worth a moment. The railroad in 1888 is the largest single fact in American economic life. The network of rail lines crossing the continent has reached by this year approximately 150,000 miles of track, which is more than all of Europe combined. The expansion has been astonishing and violent and transformative in ways that were not all comfortable to watch, and for many people were not comfortable at all. The small towns the train passes through tonight, the ones visible as clusters of lights before they are passed, many of them exist because the railroad came through and established a station, or they ceased to grow in the way they might have grown because the railroad did not. The railroad was not neutral infrastructure. It was the organizing spine of an entire economy, and the Pullman car running along it in the middle of the night with its white linen tablecloths and its ice cream service was a symbol of who that economy was organized to serve and who it was organized to extract from. The cattle ranchers and the wheat farmers and the coal miners whose labor produced the raw material of American wealth in this period were not riding in the Pullman car. Most of them had never been inside one. They were riding, if they were riding at all, in the day coaches, the cars without velvet seats and without porters, the cars with hard wooden benches and no dining service and no provision for sleeping, except whatever position you could manage in the seat you had paid perhaps $1.50 for. The gap between the day coach and the sleeping car on the same train was a precise physical measurement of the social distance between the people who controlled American capital and the people whose labor produced it. This gap would eventually produce in 1894, 6 years from the night we are inhabiting, the Pullman Strike, one of the largest and most violent labor actions in American history, centered on the town of Pullman, Illinois, just south of Chicago, which George Pullman had built specifically to house his workforce, controlling the rents they paid and the prices in the company store and the conditions of their daily lives, with the same meticulous attention he brought to the design of the sleeping car interiors. When the workers struck, he refused to negotiate. President Grover Cleveland sent in federal troops. 13 workers were killed. The strike was broken and George Pullman returned to his house, which was a very large house, and continued operating his company. But that is 1894, and tonight is 1888, and the train is running through Ohio now, and the window shows nothing but dark and the faint outline of the hills going by, and you are warm under your Pullman blankets, and whatever the full weight of the system you are sleeping inside of, the immediate physical experience of it is genuinely, undeniably comfortable. This is one of the things about the Gilded Age that is both simple and strange to hold in your mind at the same time. The comfort was real. It was painstakingly constructed and expertly maintained, and the people who experienced it were not wrong to appreciate it. The fact that it rested on a foundation of exploited labor does not make the comfort a fiction. It makes the comfort a fact with a price tag that was not visible on the menu. Around midnight, the train slows for a water stop somewhere in eastern Ohio. You can feel the deceleration as a shift in the motion, not a stop exactly, but a change in the quality of the movement, from the steady rhythm of highway speed to something gentler. The click of the wheels on the rail joints slows, and through your window you can see the lights of a station platform, and then the platform itself, and then a man in a heavy coat standing near the water tower in the cold with his hands in his pockets, looking at the train with the particular blank expression of someone who sees this train every night and has stopped finding it interesting. The stop lasts perhaps 3 minutes. The conductor is walking the platform somewhere, checking his schedule. The water is flowing through the pipes. In the dining car, the kitchen has been cleaned and the chef is sleeping on a narrow pad on the kitchen floor, which is the only provision the car makes for his rest. In the club car, if there are still men awake, they are quieter now, the conversation worn down to the late-night residue of conversation, not quite talk and not quite silence. Thomas is awake. He is sitting in his chair at the end of the car, and he is awake because the bell has rung twice in the last hour. Once for a passenger who wanted a second blanket, and once for a passenger who had a headache and wanted aspirin, which he keeps in the small supply cabinet near the dressing room, along with bandages and stomach powders, and the other minor medical provisions that experience has taught him the car needs. He has been awake for 17 hours. He will be awake in some form of attendance for approximately 6 more, until the train reaches Chicago at 5:30 in the morning, and the passengers begin to emerge from their curtained berths, blinking and slow, and he makes up each berth as it is vacated, and he carries bags, and he answers questions, and he accepts or does not accept the tips pressed into his hand at the platform, and he says, "Thank you, sir," and "Have a safe journey, ma'am," with exactly the warmth and the distance that the situation requires. And then the train empties and he is alone in the car, and he sits down in the seat that is a porter's seat and not quite anything else, and he is very tired. But we are still in Ohio, in the dark, at midnight, and the train has started moving again. The car is completely quiet now. Even the woman who was reading has finally turned out her light. The only illumination in the car is the very low emergency lamp at each end, small warm points of amber light that are enough to navigate by, but not enough to read by, not enough to disturb sleep. The curtains on each berth are drawn. The sounds are the sounds of the train itself, the wheels and the occasional sound of the car settling on the rail, and from beyond the car walls the sound of winter Ohio air going past at 40 miles an hour, a low-pitched sound that is not quite wind and not quite anything else, just the sound of speed in the dark. Your breathing has slowed. Whether you have been following the story of this train or only half following it, lying in your own bed in whatever year and place you actually inhabit, something about the rhythm of the telling has done what it was meant to do. The sentences have gotten longer, the details have gotten quieter. We have moved from the dining car and its silver cutlery and its standing rib roast into something that has less to do with information and more to do with being inside a particular night. Let us stay inside it. The train moves through the dark of Ohio with the patience of something very large and very certain of where it is going. The engine at the front of the train is a steam locomotive of the type called a 10-wheeler, which means it has 10 driving wheels, and it burns coal, and the coal comes from a tender car directly behind it. And the fire in the furnace of the locomotive is a thing of considerable and constant intensity, a fire that must be fed and maintained by two men, the fireman and the engineer, who are awake up in the cab behind the headlamp in the cold Ohio air, managing this very large and very hot machine through the dark at 40 miles an hour, with the instruments and experience and steady alertness that is their job, and that they are, like Thomas, very good at. The headlamp of the locomotive throws a cone of light maybe 200 feet ahead on the track. Beyond that cone, the track is in complete darkness, visible to the engineer only because he knows it is there, because he has run this route enough times that the curve before the bridge and the long straight through the valley and the grade down into the station stop are all mapped in his body, not just in his mind. He doesn't need to see the track. He knows where it goes. He knows what it does. He drives through the dark on the memory of the light. There is something about that I find deeply comfortable, I realize, as I think about it. The way a route, learned well enough, can be navigated in the dark. The way knowing where you are going allows you to move through the absence of seeing it. There is a quality of trust in it. The trust that what has been there before will be there again. The trust that the track continues, that the bridge is sound, that the valley follows the grade as it always has. The engineer's trust in the darkness is a version of something we all do when we go to sleep, a letting go into an unknown that we have decided, on the basis of all the previous nights, to trust. The train moves through a town. You can tell because the darkness outside your window changes, briefly, to a series of lit windows at different heights and distances, a yellow square, and then another, and then a lit storefront, and then the station platform sliding past, and then darkness again. The town is perhaps a minute long. You do not know what town it is. It does not matter. It is a town in Ohio in November of 1888, and people are awake in it, doing the things that people do in small towns late at night. And then you are past it, and the dark comes back, and the sound of the wheels changes slightly as the train crosses a bridge, a brief hollow resonance, and then the regular rhythm resumes. You are very nearly asleep. The blankets have that particular accumulated warmth that blankets reach after they have been absorbing body heat for an hour or more, a warmth that is neither the temperature of the air nor exactly the temperature of the body, but something in between, something that does not demand anything of you, that simply maintains itself. The mattress is no longer a surface you are lying on. It is just there, the way the ground is there, the way the floor of a house is there. Simply a fact of the world that requires no attention. The wheel clicks have become less discreet. They have blurred at the edges of your consciousness into a continuous low sound that has a rhythm but not a beat. The way breathing has a rhythm, the way the heart has a rhythm. Something that happens underneath awareness rather than inside it. Thomas, at his chair, has allowed himself to close his eyes. He is not sleeping. He can tell the difference in himself between the half-consciousness of exhaustion and the darkness of actual sleep, and he has learned to navigate the narrow strip of territory between them, to rest without crossing the border. His ears are still working. They will hear the bell if it rings, and he will be on his feet and moving before the sound has finished, a reflex so practiced it has become something faster than thought. But his eyes are closed and his breathing has deepened, and in this narrow strip between wakefulness and sleep, he is perhaps thinking about Baltimore, about the letter from his mother that is in his jacket pocket, and that he read 3 times this afternoon before the departure, about the book he left on his table in Chicago that he is 3/4 of the way through, and that he thinks about the way you think about something you want to get back to, with a particular quiet anticipation that is not urgent but is very present. Or perhaps he is not thinking about anything at all. Perhaps the exhaustion has done what exhaustion eventually does, and the thoughts have dissolved into the low sound of the train moving through the dark, and he is simply there, in the body, in the chair, in the middle of the night in Ohio, hearing without listening. The train will arrive in Indiana in perhaps 2 hours. The landscape will flatten further, the hills becoming suggestions and then becoming nothing, the sky opening up as the trees thin at the edge of the great prairie that begins where the corn starts and does not end for a very long time. In Indiana in November, the fields are stripped and dark, the harvest done weeks ago, and the soil is turning the deep brown black of a frozen thing, slowly thawing and freezing again in alternation. And the farmhouses that appear and disappear beside the track are set back further from the line now, the properties larger, the distances between lights longer. By 3 in the morning, on a night like this, the only things moving in Indiana are the trains. The Adirondack is not the only train on this route tonight. The New York to Chicago run is one of the busiest rail corridors in the country in 1888, and there are other trains running in both directions, some carrying passengers, some carrying freight, some carrying the mail, which moves by train in this period and which must move with a schedule so precisely maintained that the post office has its own railway mail service, its own cars, its own clerks, sorting letters in the moving car by lantern light through the dark. Those mail clerks, sorting their letters in a car much less comfortable than the Adirondack, are doing a job that requires concentration and dexterity and the ability to work in a moving space in the middle of the night, and they are doing it now, somewhere on a parallel track, as you lie warm and still in your berth, and the blankets hold their temperature, and the wheels keep time. There is a quality to the middle of a long night journey that is different from either the beginning or the end of it. The beginning has its own energy, the departure, the newness of the space, the interest of the first hours. The end has its own gathering momentum, the approach, the anticipation of arrival, the way the body begins to reorient toward waking. But the middle of the night on a train that is still hours from anywhere is a particular kind of time that does not exist in quite the same form in any other setting. It is a time out of the normal sequence of things. You are between places, between times, between the person you were when you boarded and the person you will be when you arrive. The train holds you in this between state and carries you through it with complete equanimity, not rushing and not lingering, just moving steadily through the dark at the same speed it has maintained all night. The people who used to travel by coach, before the railroad, and in 1888 there are still people alive who remember this, people in their 60s and 70s who made journeys like this by horse-drawn coach when they were children, journeys that took not 16 hours but 3 or 4 days. Those people, when asked to compare the experiences, tend to speak of the coach journey with a kind of ambivalence that the train journey rarely produces. The coach was slower, obviously, and less comfortable, but it moved through the landscape at a pace that allowed the landscape to be present in a different way. You could see the details of the countryside, the particular shapes of the trees, the texture of the road. You stopped at inns and ate in dining rooms and slept in beds that had been slept in before by other travelers, accumulating in the rough towels and the unevenly stuffed mattresses a kind of collective human history of the route. The journey was a thing that happened to you. You were in it, not just inside it. The train journey is different. The train moves too fast for the landscape to be present in the same way. The details blur into impressions. Impressions blur into darkness. Darkness becomes simply the fact of the night outside the window. You are not in the landscape. You are being conveyed across it. It is a different relationship, and whether it is better or worse depends on what you think a journey is for. George Pullman thought a journey was for arriving rested and well-fed and ready to conduct the business you traveled to conduct. This is a reasonable position. It is also a position that tends to produce in the people who adopt it completely a certain indifference to the between state, the middle of the journey, the dark in Ohio. Pullman's genius was designing a space that made the between state so comfortable that the absence of engagement with the world outside the window felt like luxury rather than loss. Whether it was luxury or loss depends on the window. The train is in Indiana now. The window shows nothing but the occasional farm light and the absolute dark of an open field in November at 2 a.m. The sound of the wheels is the same sound it has been for the last several hours, steady and patient. The heat in the car is the same even warmth. The air in your berth is the same warm, close air, slightly different from the air outside by some fraction of a degree that the body registers without acknowledging. The berth above you is empty. Below you, the passenger who had been reading is breathing in the slow, regular rhythm of someone genuinely asleep. The man with the bad back has been still for hours. 2 berths forward, someone is snoring, softly enough that it is a texture in the background rather than a foreground event, the sound of another person sleeping, which is among the most fundamentally companionable sounds there is. Thomas has moved from his chair to check the car once, quietly, walking the length of the aisle between the curtains in the dark without a lamp because he does not need one, knows the count and the position of each berth, moves between them with the particular silence of someone who has practiced this so many times that the practice has become a kind of knowledge held in the feet and the body rather than the mind. He pauses at berth 11, where the woman travelling alone for the first time has left her light on and is sleeping with her face turned toward the window, and he can see from the gap in the curtain that she is deeply asleep, and the light that he decided not to ask her to turn off is providing a small warm glow in the fabric of the curtain and causing no trouble to anyone, and he moves on. Back at his chair he sits. The car sways very gently on the rails, a motion so small and so constant that it has ceased to register as motion and has become simply the way the world feels. Everything sways slightly, everything tilts by a fraction of a degree and recovers. The darkness outside the windows is the same darkness it has been all night, an Indiana darkness, flat and deep and without feature. It is 2:15 in the morning. In 3 hours and 15 minutes, more or less, the Adirondack will be approaching the outskirts of Chicago, and the darkness outside the windows will begin to be replaced by the industrial lights of the city, the blast furnaces and the rail yards and the packing houses and the gas lights of the streets. All of it approaching through the November darkness like a second sun rising in the wrong direction, red and industrial and enormous. The city will present itself at a distance before it arrives, making itself known through its light and its smell before the train is anywhere near it. Chicago in 1888 smells of the stockyards and the river and the coal that heats 1,000,000 rooms, and the smell carries. But that is 3 hours away. Right now, the train is in the middle of Indiana, and the night is the night, and the car is quiet, and whatever this journey is, luxury and labor and social hierarchy and beautiful wood paneling and exploited men and extraordinary food and cold farmhouses going past in the dark, all of it is reduced at this particular hour to the essential physical facts of it: the warmth, the motion, The sound of wheels on rails, the weight of blankets, the faint smell of wool and clean linen, the occasional creak of the car settling into itself as the temperature outside drops a degree or two in the deepest part of the night. These are the facts, these specific, physical, undeniable facts, and they are the same facts for Thomas in his chair, and for you in your berth, and for the woman who was reading, and the man with the bad back, and the cook sleeping on the kitchen floor, and the engineer in the locomotive cab, and the mail clerk sorting letters on the parallel track, and all the other people passing through this particular piece of darkness at this particular speed on this particular night. The darkness does not distinguish between them. It holds them all with exactly the same indifference and exactly the same patience and exactly the same absolute, unhurried, total dark. The train moves. The Indiana night is flat and still, and the fields on either side of the track are bare and sleeping. The soil turned up and left to freeze, and the cornstalks cut down, and the farmhouses with their lights out, the people inside them in the deepest part of the sleep that rural people in cold climates learn. The long winter sleep that conserves heat and energy and that the body finds more easily when the temperature drops and the dark comes early. In those farmhouses right now, in the beds with the extra quilts pulled up, people are sleeping in the particular total way of people who are very tired and have no reason to be anywhere until dawn. Sleep in 1888 is not the same as sleep now, in the way that all the physical facts of life are both recognizable and not quite the same across the distance of 140 years. The beds in those farmhouses are deeper and softer than most modern beds, piled feather ticks that take the impression of the body in a specific way that modern mattresses don't. The rooms are colder. There is no central heating in an Indiana farmhouse in 1888, only the residual warmth from the kitchen stove. And by 2 in the morning that warmth is largely gone and the temperature inside is not much above the temperature outside, which is perhaps 25 degrees. The heaviness of the quilts is not a luxury. It is the means of survival through the night. People curl tighter, conserving heat unconsciously, and the sleep that results is not just rest, but a kind of hibernation, a bodily withdrawal from the demands of the cold. On the train, the heating is maintained all night. This is one of the things that set the Pullman car apart from the day coaches, which relied on potbelly stoves that went cold or overheated by turns, and distributed their warmth in a way that left some passengers freezing and others sweltering depending on how far from the stove they sat. The Pullman car's heating system, a network of pipes run from a central boiler, maintained a steady temperature in the range of 60 to 65 degrees throughout the night, which by the standards of 1888 was genuinely warm. Warm in the way of a well-managed house rather than the haphazard warmth of a space that is heated because fire happens to be present. The passengers of the Adirondack are sleeping in more comfort than most Americans are experiencing tonight. This is the point of the Pullman car. This is what they paid for. And the point of this story, the thing I find impossible to let go of, is that the comfort is real and specific and physical, and the cost of it is also real and specific and physical, and you cannot actually separate one from the other, except by deciding not to look at both at the same time. The train shifts slightly as it takes a very gentle curve, a curve so gradual you would not feel it in a car on a road, but that you can feel on a train because the train is so long, the movement of the curve travelling through the linked cars like a slow wave, and your body adjusts without waking, without any conscious response, just the tiny incremental shift of weight and balance that the inner ear manages without consultation. You have been on this train for how long? Since 9 in the evening, roughly? And it is past 2, so more than 5 hours. And you have perhaps another 3 to Chicago. You are past the midpoint of the journey in distance and somewhere in the deepest part of the night in time, and these 2 midpoints have converged in a way that means you are very far from where you started, and not yet close to where you are going, suspended in the exact middle of something. This is an odd feeling when you think about it. Odd and not unpleasant. The sense of being between, of the usual coordinates being temporarily not in effect. You are not in New York and you are not in Chicago. You are in Indiana in the dark on a train that is moving steadily and will continue moving steadily and will arrive, as it always arrives, at the time it is supposed to arrive. There is nothing required of you in this between state. No decisions to make, no directions to know. The train knows where it is going, and the people responsible for getting it there are doing that work. And your only job right now is to be inside the warmth and the dark and the steady rhythm and to let the miles pass. People have found this particular permission, the permission to simply be carried, one of the deepest pleasures of train travel since train travel began. It is the opposite of driving, which requires constant attention and constant decision-making. It is the opposite of flying, which requires constant low-level anxiety about something that the body knows is not right even when the mind accepts it. The train is on the ground and it is going at a speed the body can understand, and there is nothing to do, and this is a very specific kind of rest, a rest that goes deeper than physical stillness because it includes the mind, the planning mind, the navigating mind, the mind that is usually always at least partially occupied with the logistics of getting somewhere. On the train, the logistics are handled. The train moves through a small city, larger than the towns before it, and there are more lights now, a stretch of lit street and a factory running the night shift and the signal lights along the track, and a crossing gate with its red lamp swinging, and a car stopped at the crossing waiting for the train to pass, and the headlamps sweeping the sides of buildings as the train curves through the center of the city. And then the city is behind you and the dark is back, and the flat Indiana landscape resumes its dark and patient presence outside the window. The car has settled into its deepest night now. The sounds are at their lowest, the movement at its most measured. The porter has not moved from his chair in 40 minutes. The passengers are deeply asleep. Most of them, the particular deep sleep of the middle of the night, when the body has completed its first full cycle and moved into the longer dreamless phase that occupies the early hours of the morning. Someone 2 berths forward has stopped snoring. The woman who was reading has turned in her sleep, and her face is away from the window now. The man with the bad back is precisely as still as someone sleeping without pain, which means the arrangement worked, and Thomas will know this in the morning when the man shakes his hand at the platform and says, with genuine warmth, "That was the best night's sleep I have had on this route in 3 years," and presses $1 into his hand, which is a generous tip, and Thomas will say "Thank you, sir," and mean part of it. The heating pipes emit a very quiet tick every now and then, the metal expanding in the warmth, a domestic sound, the sound of a house in winter, the sound of any warm space in a cold season, a sound the body hears without waking and interprets correctly as everything is fine. The temperature is maintained, the walls are doing what walls do, the conductor is moving through the train, working his way back from the locomotive, checking tickets in the sleeping cars with the particular care of someone who knows that the passengers are asleep and that the business of confirming their tickets can be done without waking them if he moves quietly and reads the ticket stubs by the light of the small lamp he carries. He moves through the Adirondack like a ghost, pausing at each berth to confirm the stub clipped to the curtain, making a note in his book, moving on. His shoes are soft-soled, and he has been conducting for 12 years, and he does not make unnecessary noise. He does not wake anyone. He passes through the car and is gone. The train is past the city now, back in the flat dark of the Indiana countryside, and the lights have thinned again to occasional single points, farmhouses and feed stores, and the lamps of the crossing keepers who live in small houses beside the tracks, and whose job is to close the gate when the train approaches and open it again after. A job that exists entirely in service of the train, a life organized around the passage of this thing in the dark. Some of the crossing keepers do this work for years and never go anywhere on the train they spend their lives accommodating. The train passes, they open the gate and the dust settles, and they go back inside. There is a quality to the Indiana dark at this hour, at this time of year, that is not quite anything else. I am reaching here, I know, trying to put words to something that is more felt than described. The specific emptiness of the American Midwest in the deep middle of a November night, the way the absence of topography means the sky is a larger share of the world than it is anywhere else, And the sky at 2 in the morning in a place without electric lighting is a different sky from the one you see on a lit street or in a city park at night. It is an older sky. It has more stars. The Milky Way is visible as a physical presence, a density of light that looks, to someone who has never seen it without city light pollution, like a cloud that does not move. The engineer in the locomotive has been watching that sky for hours. He does not think about it in these terms. He is not watching the Milky Way for its beauty. He is watching the sky and the track and the signal lights and the darkness around the train with the alert, practical attention of someone whose job is to see what is there. But the sky is there too, and the stars are there, and between the watching and the not quite watching, somewhere in the periphery of his attention, the old sky is going over him the same way it is going over the farmhouses and the cornfields and the crossing keeper in his small house and the passengers in their berths, and Thomas in his chair. It is going over all of them equally and at the same rate and with the same indifference. At some point between 2 and 3 in the morning, the train crosses from Indiana into Illinois, though there is no marker visible from the window, no sign or change in the landscape, just a line on a map that the train crosses at whatever speed it happens to be running. Illinois in November looks exactly like Indiana in November. The fields are the same dark fields. The sky is the same sky. The dark is continuous and does not know about state lines. But Chicago is in Illinois, and Chicago is getting closer, though not close enough yet to feel. The car is still deeply quiet. The depths of the small hours have given the sleeping a quality beyond sleep, a depth and a stillness that is almost monastic. The particular absence of the body's daytime activities, the absence of hunger and decision and conversation and self-presentation. The Pullman passengers are, at this hour, as free from the requirements of their social positions as they are ever going to be. The wealthy Chicago merchant in lower 5 has the same unconscious face as the attorney in upper 9, and the woman traveling alone in berth 3. Sleep is the democracy the day refuses to offer. Thomas knows this. He has watched people sleep for 7 years. He knows what they look like when they are being nothing other than people, without the money and the status and the professional distance and the careful management of social presentation. He has a private opinion about this that he does not share with anyone on the train, about the equalizing function of the sleeping car, about the way the curtains do what the society around them will not. He keeps this opinion where he keeps most of his opinions on this train: interior, quiet, available only to himself in the hours when the face is not needed. The night is thinning, very slightly, barely perceptibly. The quality of the dark outside the windows has begun to change, not lighter yet, but different, less absolute. The way the sky begins to change before anyone can say the word dawn. Some preparatory shift in the atmosphere that is visible only if you have been watching the same darkness for hours and have developed a kind of calibration for it. Thomas has been watching it for years. He knows what this means. Approximately an hour and 45 minutes to Chicago. Time to begin the preparation. Not the waking up preparation. That is still an hour away. The preparation of the porter's body and the porter's face. The gathering of the energy that will be required for the last phase of the journey. The emergence of the passengers. The making up of berths as they are vacated. The carrying of bags, the final service of the run. He closes his eyes for the last time tonight and does something that is not quite prayer and not quite meditation, but is his own private version of both, a brief internal gathering, a preparation for presence. The train is moving through the Illinois countryside at 45 miles an hour. The locomotive burns coal. The fire in the furnace is as hot as it has been all night, maintained by the fireman with the steady attentiveness his job requires. The rails extend through the dark ahead of the headlamp into the invisible distance. The passengers sleep. The blankets in berth 7 are very warm. The sound of the wheels is the same sound it has been all night, the same rhythm, the same patient insistence on forward movement, the same steady beat that the body hears as safe and continues therefore to accept. The landscape outside the window, invisible in the dark, is the landscape of the American prairie in winter, a landscape so vast and so flat that it is less a place than a condition, an atmospheric fact, a quality of space that you feel in the chest before you see it with the eyes. When the light comes, in an hour or so, the prairie will present itself slowly, the horizon appearing before anything else, the line between the dark land and the beginning sky, and then the sky brightening by degrees and the fields becoming distinguishable from the dark, brown and grey and the occasional white patch of frost, and the farmsteads becoming visible, far apart, each one its own small world. But the light is not yet. The dark holds everything. You are somewhere in the middle of Illinois, warm and horizontal, and breathing in the slow rhythm of someone who is not quite awake, and not quite asleep, but in the state between, the state the train produces and maintains, and that the darkness outside the window extends and the sound of the wheels perpetuates. You are moving at 45 miles an hour toward Chicago. You have been on this train for 6 hours. You have another hour and a half. You are in no particular hurry. The Pullman car moves with you, carrying its complications and its luxury and its history and its beauty and all the people inside it, the sleeping passengers and the watching porter and the exhausted cook and the engineer in the cold cab, all of them moving together through the dark Illinois prairie in the last deep hour of the November night, and none of it is simple, and none of it is entirely what it looks like from the outside, and all of it is in this moment, in this particular quality of darkness, at this particular hour, very still. The wheels turn. The train moves through the dark. The blankets hold their warmth. Somewhere in a farmhouse in Illinois, a woman pulls her quilts closer in her sleep, feeling the cold without waking. In the locomotive cab, the engineer squints into the headlamp's cone of light on the track ahead. In the dining car kitchen, the cook has been asleep for 4 hours on his narrow pad and will begin to stir in another 40 minutes, beginning the preparations for the breakfast service that the arriving passengers will expect. In berth number 3, the woman travelling alone has turned again in her sleep, and her face is toward the aisle now, and in the faint light she looks very young and very peaceful. Thomas is on his feet. The sky to the east has begun to show the very first suggestion of the thing that is not quite light yet. He begins quietly to prepare the car for arrival. He sets out a small selection of the morning papers that were loaded at the stop in Toledo, folding them neatly on the seat at the end of the car. He checks the wash basin supply in the dressing rooms, makes sure there are fresh towels. He prepares on the small shelf in the vestibule the shoe-shining materials, the brushes and the wax and the soft cloths, because when the passengers begin to emerge they will want their shoes, and the shoes will be waiting, shined, placed outside each berth in the order in which they were collected. The shoes! Every passenger who wanted their shoes shined left them outside their berth curtain the night before, and Thomas collected them and he shined them, somewhere in the middle of the night between the bell calls and the water checks and the temperature checks and the moment of near sleep in the chair. 22 shoes, 11 pairs, each one polished to the standard the Pullman Company required, which was a high standard, a standard that meant no passenger would look at their shoes in the morning and feel that anything had been neglected. He places them back now, one pair at a time, outside each curtain. He moves through the car in the grey pre-dawn light and places them one by one, these small things that the passengers will step into in an hour, and the gesture has something in it that is beyond a job well done. It is, if you look at it clearly, one of the most intimate acts of service imaginable, to prepare the thing that someone will put on their body first in the morning, to make it ready before they have asked for it, to leave it there without announcement. He does not announce it. He simply places the shoes and moves on. The sky is lighter now, definitely lighter, the horizon visible as a distinction between two shades of dark, the land dark and the sky dark, different in a way that was not there an hour ago. The prairie is beginning to be present in the way it is present at dawn, as an absence first, the absence of anything between you and a very long way away, and then, slowly, as a positive thing, a space with its own grandeur. In about 40 minutes, the first of the passengers will begin to stir. They will pull back their curtains and emerge into the morning of the car, blinking, in the slightly disoriented state of people who slept in a moving train and are working out where they are and how close they are to where they are going. They will find the car neat and warm, and their shoes outside their berths, and the papers folded at the end of the car, and Thomas near the dressing room, available, attentive, ready, and Chicago will appear on the horizon as the city it is, vast and smoky and particular, the city of the stockyards and the elevated rail and the lake and the wind, already wide awake at 5 in the morning, and entirely indifferent to the arrivals of any individual train. The Adirondack will pull into the LaSalle Street station at 5:37, 4 minutes behind schedule, which is a respectable performance for a 900-mile overnight run in November. The passengers will file out onto the platform carrying their cases, some of them still in the slightly unmoored state of recent sleep, others already alert and purposeful, already in the city in their minds even before they step onto the platform. They will pass Thomas on the way out, most of them, and some of them will press something into his hand, and some of them will not, and he will say thank you to all of them with exactly the same warmth, because he has learned that distributing his warmth proportionally to the tips would cost him something he cannot afford to lose. The platform at LaSalle Street at 5:30 in the morning smells of coal smoke and cold air, and the faint animal smell of the stockyards that blows in from the southwest on November mornings when the wind is in that direction. The sky above the station is not yet fully light, still that deep grey blue of the last moments before the sun commits to rising, and the platform lights are gas and they make halos in the cold air. The passengers from the Adirondack merge with the passengers from other trains, becoming briefly a crowd, and then dispersing into cabs, into the street, into the city. Thomas stands at the platform end of the Adirondack for a moment, watching them go. Then he turns back to the car. There are berths to make up, a dining car to prepare for the Chicago crew coming on, reports to file, and then, if the schedule holds, 4 hours in Chicago before the return run to New York, and in those 4 hours there is the letter to finish to his mother, and the book he is reading, and a meal in the boarding house on State Street where the Pullman porters who know each other stay when they are in Chicago, and something close to sleep in a room that does not move. The city is waking up around him, and the train is on the platform, and the night is over. The night, this particular long night, the oyster soup and the standing rib roast and the velvet seats and the fabric corridor of berths and the Ohio darkness and the Indiana fields and the Illinois sky going from black to grey to the beginning of light is over. It was beautiful and it was complicated and it was real, and all of it happened on the same train to the same people in the same moving darkness, and none of it was simple, and none of it is quite what the advertisement said it was. Sleep well wherever you are tonight. I hope there is warmth around you and something soft beneath you, and the sound of something steady in the background, a rhythm without urgency, something that carries you gently through the dark toward the morning. I hope that when you arrive, the shoes are waiting and the coffee is ready, and the person who made it is seen and thanked and known by their own name. Good night, but we are not quite finished yet. Let me take you back. Back before the arrival, back before the grey dawn over the prairie, back to the middle of the journey, because there is still so much of the night I have not shown you, and the night on a Pullman car is a world that deserves to be walked through slowly, not hurried past in the direction of Chicago. Let me take you back to Ohio, and the dinner that happened before Ohio, and the life that was happening on this train that the sleeping berths contain but do not fully describe. The dining car opened at 6:30 in the evening, half an hour after departure, and the service ran until 9. 3 hours of dinner on a moving train, 3 hours of white tablecloths and silver cutlery, and the particular conversation that Pullman dining car etiquette produced, which was its own fascinating subject. The steward who managed the dining car on the New York to Chicago run on this particular November evening was a man named James, who had been working Pullman dining service for 9 years, and who ran his car with a precision that would have been recognizable to anyone who has worked a demanding service floor. James was 40 years old, a large-framed man with reading glasses he wore on a cord around his neck, and he had the particular quality of authority that belongs to people who are very good at managing things, a quiet, unhurried certainty that everything was going to be handled correctly because he was there and he was handling it. The dining car kitchen had been stocked in New York that afternoon. This was a logistical operation that the passengers never saw, because it happened before boarding, in the staging area behind the station where the Pullman Company's provisioning crew loaded the cars with everything they would need for the journey. The ice storage under the car received a fresh block, several 100 pounds of it, cut and delivered that morning from the ice house. The oysters for the soup had come in from the coast that morning, packed in ice in wooden crates, and they were still alive when the chef received them, which was the standard he required. The beef for the roast had been selected from the Chicago Union stockyards on the previous run and transported in the refrigerator car that ran as part of the train's consist, specifically to carry perishables for the dining service. The vegetables were from the market that morning. The bread rolls were baked by the chef during the pre-departure period while the car was still stationary. This is what it took to serve dinner on a Pullman car. It was not an afterthought, it was a supply chain. The first passengers began arriving in the dining car at 6:45. They were seated in order of arrival, couples and individuals placed at tables that held 4, with James making the social calculations that this involved who could be seated with whom without creating obvious awkwardness, which single travellers might prefer not to be seated with other single travellers, which parties clearly wanted their privacy, and which ones seemed amenable to company. He made these decisions in seconds on the basis of observation and experience, and he was almost always right. One of the passengers who came to dinner that evening was a woman travelling alone. Her name was Mrs. Harriet Comstock, and she was 51 years old, and she was travelling from New York to Chicago on business, which in 1888 was a thing unusual enough that other passengers noticed it without quite staring. She was a widow, had been for 6 years, and she had in those 6 years taken over the management of her late husband's dry goods importing business, with a thoroughness and a competence that had surprised everyone except herself. The business was doing well, better in fact than it had done in her husband's last years, though she was careful not to say this in the company of people who had known her husband. She travelled to Chicago several times a year for business meetings with her suppliers and her accounts manager, and she travelled alone, and she had been riding the Pullman cars long enough that she had her preferences down to a science. Lower berth, window side. Dinner at 7, not 6:45. The steak rather than the lamb, when both were offered, though the lamb here was generally very good. A half bottle of the Burgundy rather than the Bordeaux, because the Bordeaux on Pullman cars tended toward the heavy and she had a long day behind her. She tipped generously because she had worked enough of her own service staff to know exactly what the work cost. She was seated across from a man who introduced himself as Mr. Charles Whitfield, a lawyer from Philadelphia travelling to Chicago to argue a case involving a railway land grant, which was, he said with the dry understatement of a man who had been arguing railway land grant cases for 20 years, a reliably complicated area of the law. He was perhaps 60, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and was now simply interesting, and he had the lawyer's habit of listening very carefully to everything said in a conversation and appearing to evaluate each thing on its merits before responding. They talked, over the oyster soup and the fish course, about the railway expansion, a safe topic, widely relevant, not politically divisive in a way that would create discomfort. Mrs. Comstock had views about the rate structure that the railways were charging shippers, views that were well informed and specific, and Mr. Whitfield was surprised, and then interested, and then genuinely engaged, and the conversation shifted in the way that good dinner conversations shift, from the safe topics into something slightly more substantive, and they were both the kind of people who found substantive conversation more comfortable than the kind that stays safe throughout. They talked about the labour situation in Chicago, which was unavoidable in 1888 for anyone who paid attention to the newspapers. 2 years earlier, Haymarket. The word itself was enough. and they both understood what it meant for the city they were approaching and for the country they both lived in, and for the workers whose situation it had crystallized, and for the employers whose response to that situation was still being worked out in the streets and the courts and the newspapers and the drawing rooms of every city with an industrial base. Mrs. Comstock had opinions about this too, and they were not the opinions you might expect from a woman who ran a successful importing business, or perhaps they were, depending on which direction your expectations bent. Mr. Whitfield was genuinely surprised and listened and offered a counterpoint, and she replied to it, and by the time the roast was served they had been talking for 50 minutes and the ice had been entirely dissolved by something more interesting than itself. This is the thing about the Pullman dining car that the advertisements also did not quite capture. It was not merely the food, though the food was genuinely excellent. It was the particular social laboratory that the combination of a fixed space, a limited population, and the absence of the usual social escape routes created. On a train you could not leave. Not really. You could return to your berth, but the dinner table was where you ate, and if you were seated with someone who interested you, the train's own momentum held you there, kept you from the kind of restless exit that would have been easy in any other setting. The train was a closed world for the duration of the journey, and in a closed world, conversations sometimes went further than they would have gone in an open one. Mrs. Comstock and Mr. Whitfield did not become friends exactly. They had no reason to expect to see each other again, and the specific social world of the Pullman dining car had its own etiquette around the management of these chance intimacies. The understanding that what was said here was in some sense bracketed, held separately from the ordinary continuity of social life. But for the duration of that dinner, moving through the early dark of a November night at 40 miles an hour, they were two people who talked honestly and found it worthwhile. She left the dining car at 8:40. He stayed for a brandy with the remaining passengers in the club car configuration, and she returned to her berth, and she read until 10, and then she put out her light and lay in the dark and listened to the train. She was not asleep. This is the thing about the Pullman car that I want to tell you, and that I think matters more than the food or the social hierarchy or any of the other details I have spent this night walking through with you. The thing is this: the Pullman car at night, in the middle of a journey, in the period between when you put out your light and when you actually fall asleep, was a space that did something to the mind that ordinary spaces do not do. You were moving. This was the foundation of it. You were horizontal and warm and not moving yourself, but moving, being moved, carried through the dark at a speed that the body felt in its deep tissue even when the conscious mind was not attending to it. The motion was a fact of the body in a way that the motion of an airplane is not, because an airplane's motion is disconnected from anything the body has a reference for, a terrifying speed in an alien medium. But the train's motion is a ground motion, a motion the body can locate. There is still rail beneath you, still the resistance of solid material, still the sound of wheels on a solid surface. You are fast, but you are not floating. You are moving through a world that is still recognizably the world. And in this state, horizontal and warm and carried and not quite asleep, certain kinds of thought become available that are not available in ordinary stillness. Mrs. Comstock lay in her berth and thought about her daughter, who was 23 years old, and had recently told her, in the kind of conversation that daughters sometimes have with their mothers when they feel that they have been patient long enough, that she was considering moving to Boston to study medicine at the Women's Medical College there. This was the thought that had been with her underneath the dinner conversation and the burgundy and the oyster soup and the competent and pleasant talk about railway rate structures all evening. Her daughter wanted to study medicine in Boston alone, and Mrs. Comstock had not yet decided how she felt about this, had not quite finished the work of finding out how she felt about this, and the train was making the thinking available to her in the particular way of train thought, which is less like deciding and more like watching. She lay in the dark and the train carried her through Ohio, and she thought about her daughter, who was clever and stubborn, and who had her father's precise way of dismantling an argument and reconstructing it in a way that was inconveniently correct. She thought about her own life at 23, which had been so different that the comparison required a translation she was not entirely certain how to make. At 23 she had been newly married and newly New York, and beginning the life that had led, by unexpected routes, to a widow running an importing business and riding alone on the Pullman car to Chicago. She had not at 23 imagined this. She had not imagined her daughter studying medicine in Boston. She had imagined something that looked nothing like what had actually happened, and the distance between the imagination and the actual was not regret exactly, but it was something adjacent to regret that she had not yet found the right word for. The train moved through Ohio. She would tell her daughter yes. She was almost certain of this, almost certain that this was where the thinking was going, though it had not quite finished yet, and she was not going to force it. The train would get her to Chicago, and then the train would get her back to New York, and somewhere in that journey the thinking would arrive at its destination, and she would know. For now, the dark outside the window was Ohio, and the sound of the wheels was the sound of the wheels, and the blanket was warm. She was asleep before she reached Indiana. In the berth above hers, the young attorney was not asleep. He was 28 years old, and this was his first time in a Pullman sleeping car, and he was too excited to sleep in the way that people who are experiencing something for the first time and enjoying it very much are sometimes too excited to sleep. He lay in the upper berth with his hands behind his head and stared at the ceiling, which was perhaps 14 inches above his nose, and he felt the train moving and listened to the sounds of the car and watched the darkness through his window and thought, this is really something. His name was Robert Langley, and he was on his way to Chicago to interview for a position at a law firm on Michigan Avenue, a firm that handled commercial litigation for several of the large grain trading houses, which was not the most romantic work a young attorney could imagine, but which paid well, and which, he had been told by his professor at Columbia, who had placed the word in the right ear, offered genuine prospects. He was from Brooklyn. He had never been to Chicago. He had a leather valise in the overhead storage that contained his best suit, carefully folded, and a copy of the interview questions he had been told to prepare for, and a letter of introduction from his professor, and a very small amount of money that represented approximately 3 weeks of careful saving, and that had paid for this ticket, this berth, this very ceiling. He did not think about any of that. He lay in the dark and listened to the train and felt the motion in his body and thought about Chicago, which he had read about and heard about and thought about in the abstract way that cities are real to people who have not yet visited them, as a quality of imagination rather than a set of actual streets and smells and specific corners. Chicago was the city of the Great Fire and the stockyards and the lake, and the architecture of Louis Sullivan, whose buildings he had seen in the architectural journals in the Columbia Library and thought were like nothing else in the country, and the grain elevators and the slaughterhouses and the lake, always mentioned as something that transformed the experience of the city, something that you had to see to understand. He was going to see it. He fell asleep before Indiana, thinking about the lake and the buildings and the possibility of a life that was different from the one he had lived so far. Elsewhere in the car, and I want you to feel the fullness of it, the 20-odd human beings contained in this one car, each of them carrying an entire world. Elsewhere in the car, the woman with the red book had finished the book at 9:47 and lay with it on her chest in the dark, not quite ready to put it down, not quite done with the experience of it. The book was a novel by Henry James, and it was about women making decisions about their lives, and it was the kind of novel that required something after it, a period of sitting with it before it was possible to move on. She was a school teacher in Dayton, Ohio. She was 37. She had read this book 3 times before, always on a journey, always because journeys were the time she reserved for the things that required full attention. She lay in the dark with the book on her chest, and she was in the middle of the particular sadness and alertness that a great book leaves behind, the residue of having inhabited another consciousness for 300 pages. She was not unhappy. She was, in fact, in the way that reading well makes people feel, more fully herself than she ordinarily managed to be. She was a person who thought carefully about large things, and who taught children grammar and history in a school in Dayton, and who rode the train to New York once a year to see the galleries and the theatres and to buy books, and then rode back, and the journey was always, in both directions, the best part. She put the book on the small shelf beside her, and lay in the dark and listened to the train, and was content in the specific way that she understood herself to be content. Outside her window, Ohio went past in the dark. These are the people in the car. There are others, the cattleman in lower 7 who slept from 8:30 without seeming to notice that he had fallen asleep, as if sleep was simply a thing his body did at a certain hour regardless of circumstances, the way a very large and straightforward machine powers down when not in use. The retired banker in lower 4 who had eaten very little at dinner because his stomach had been giving him trouble for a month, and he had not yet told his wife who was meeting him in Chicago, and who lay awake for a long time looking at the darkness and not precisely thinking about his stomach. The young woman in upper 12 who was going to be married in Chicago in 3 days, and who was, well, she was going to be married in 3 days. She lay in the dark and felt the train moving and was happy and afraid and something else that did not have a name yet, and the dark and the motion and the sound of the wheels were exactly right for the feeling of moving very fast through the dark towards something that you have chosen and that is now approaching whether you are ready or not. All of these people, in their curtained berths, in the dark, moving through the night towards Chicago, and Thomas at his chair, knowing all of them in the particular way his job had taught him to know strangers, by their needs, by their small requests, by the quality of their silence and the direction of their anxiety, knowing them and being known by none of them. The bell had not rung in 2 hours. The car was as settled as it was going to get. In the vestibule between the sleeping car and the next car, there was a small window, and if you stood in the vestibule, which passengers sometimes did, late at night, when they could not sleep and did not want to disturb the car, you could look out into the dark without the reflection of the berth lamp in the glass. Just the dark itself and the speed and the occasional light going past on one side or the other, and the sound of the train louder here than inside, the mechanical sound of it, the working sound of a very large machine moving very fast through the night. Thomas stood there sometimes when the car was quiet and there was no immediate call for his attention. Not often, but sometimes. He stood in the vestibule between the cars and looked out at whatever the night was showing, Ohio or Indiana or Illinois depending on the run, and he was not exactly thinking and not exactly not thinking, and the dark moved past him at 40-some miles an hour, and the cold came in through the metal, and he stood there in his white jacket with his arms at his sides, and the night was what it was. What he thought about in those moments, if he thought about anything in particular, he never recorded. The memoirs and accounts that survive from Pullman porters of this era are rich in the practical details of the work, and honest about the injustice of the conditions, but they are mostly quiet about the inner life of the vestibule at midnight, which makes sense, which is perhaps the appropriate privacy. Not every space needs a witness. He stood there for perhaps 5 minutes. Then the bell at berth 9 rang once, softly, and he turned back into the car. The man in berth 9 wanted a glass of water. Thomas brought the water. The night continued. Let me tell you about Chicago, where the train is going, because Chicago in 1888 is not the Chicago of any later period and deserves its own moment. The city had been rebuilt 17 years earlier, after the Great Fire of 1871, which had destroyed 3.5 square miles of the city's centre, and made approximately 100,000 people homeless in a single night. The rebuilding had been one of the most remarkable urban construction projects in American history, a city rebuilt from almost nothing in the space of a decade, and rebuilt in many cases more ambitiously than what had burned. The architects who came to Chicago in the 70s and 80s found there a city without precedent in American urban life, a city without the accumulated decisions and constraints of an older place, a city that was in some sense a blank slate of extraordinary commercial energy and ambition, and very little aesthetic tradition of its own, and they built on it buildings that had no equivalent anywhere else in the world. The Chicago School of Architecture, as it would come to be called, produced in this period the first genuinely tall office buildings in the world, buildings that used steel frames rather than masonry load-bearing walls, which allowed them to rise to heights that stone walls could not have supported. The Home Insurance Building, completed in 1885, was 10 stories tall, and it was followed by a succession of buildings that pushed steadily upward in ways that observers from eastern cities and from Europe found remarkable and slightly alarming. Chicago was building a different kind of city, a city that grew vertically as well as horizontally, and the result was something that looked, from certain angles in certain lights, like nothing so much as ambition given a physical form. The stockyards lay south of the city centre, a vast complex that covered nearly a square mile, processing cattle and hogs and sheep from the ranches of the West that arrived by rail, were processed in the yards and shipped out as meat, packed in ice in refrigerator cars, another George Pullman innovation, to markets across the country and the world. The smell of the stockyards was the smell of the city on most days, a smell that visitors noted with a consistency that suggests it was not a subtle background note, but a defining atmospheric fact. It was the smell of the industry that powered the city's wealth, and the city's relationship to it was the relationship that industrial cities of the era had to the industries that sustained them, a mixture of pride and denial, and the sense that this is simply the way things smell here, which is the way things always smell somewhere. The lake was different. Lake Michigan from Chicago's lakefront is not the lake of a modest inland body of water. It is an inland sea, a body of water large enough to generate weather, to produce waves that sailors respect, to behave on storm days like an ocean that has decided to express itself in the middle of a continent. From the lakefront in November, the lake is a grey-green that has no name in the ordinary vocabulary of colours, a colour that is particular to cold freshwater and November sky, and the specific quality of Midwestern light, and it extends to the horizon without any interruption, without any landmass visible in any direction, just water and sky, until the line where they meet. People who come to Chicago expecting a city and find instead this lake are, without exception, surprised. The city is specific and hard and practical and ambitious and full of the sounds and smells of industry. The lake is none of those things. The lake is ancient and cold and entirely indifferent to Chicago, which has built itself beside the lake as if the lake were a feature of the city rather than the city being a small temporary fact at the edge of the lake. Robert Langley, arriving in the morning on this train, will see the lake for the first time when his cab takes him along the lakefront to his hotel, and he will look out the cab window and be stopped, briefly, by the scale of it. He will not say anything. There is nothing to say. He will just look, and the lake will be there, as it was before Chicago and as it will be after Chicago, cold and enormous and grey-green in the November morning. But we are still in Illinois, still an hour from the city, still in the deep night. The train moves through the Illinois countryside at the same steady speed it has maintained all night. The engine is performing well. The engineer can feel this through the controls, the way you feel a machine that is running correctly. A quality of response and resistance that tells you all the tolerances are within bounds and everything is as it should be. He is alert but not anxious. This is the run he knows, and the night has been unremarkable, which is what you want from an overnight passenger train. Unremarkable. Steady, on time. In the kitchen car, the chef has set his internal alarm for 4:30, and he will wake at 4:28. Which is how internal alarms work when you are tired enough to trust them completely. He will get up from his pad on the kitchen floor, wash his face in the small sink, put on his white jacket, and begin the breakfast preparation. Breakfast on the Pullman dining car is a simpler service than dinner, but not a simple service. Eggs prepared to order, which requires a line cook who can manage multiple preparations simultaneously in a moving kitchen. Ham and sausage from the cold storage. Hot cakes, toast cut from the loaves he baked yesterday and toasted on the range surface. Coffee, the great necessity, the thing that more than any other single item will determine whether the passengers forgive the train for the night they just had or not. The coffee must be ready at 5, available before arrival, because passengers who have been travelling all night need coffee before they need anything else, and a cup of coffee presented at exactly the right moment, hot and strong and accompanied by the cream in the small silver pitcher and the sugar in the small silver bowl, is an act of hospitality so precisely timed to need that it functions as a small kindness, a small good morning, a small this is going to be fine. James, who manages the dining car, will be up at 4:15. He has been up at 4:15 every morning for 9 years. His body no longer needs an alarm for this. The hour is simply the hour he wakes, regardless of when he fell asleep, a modification that the work has made in his physiology that he cannot now reverse and has mostly stopped trying to. He will walk through the dining car in the pre-dawn dark and straighten what needs straightening and check what needs checking, and be ready at 5 when the first early rising passengers make their way down the car connection for coffee. The passengers will come in 1s and 2s. They will sit at tables that James has already set, white linen fresh from the morning, silver laid out. The small vases on the tables removed because there is no time in the morning prep for flowers, replaced with a simple salt and pepper in matching silver. The passengers will be at varying stages of wakefulness and will require varying amounts of managing. Some will be immediately sociable, pleased with themselves for being up early and in good spirits, ready to talk about the weather they saw out the window in Indiana or the new building they glimpsed as the train entered the Chicago outskirts. Others will be enclosed in the particular shell of early morning pre-coffee need and will require only the cup and the cream and the sugar, and to be left alone, and James will read this correctly for each person and respond accordingly. This is the service. It looks simple. It requires everything. Outside the windows of the dining car, the Illinois landscape is beginning to be visible in a way it has not been all night. Not because it is light yet. The sky is still deep grey, the sun still fully below the horizon, but because the darkness has thinned enough to allow shape, and the shapes of the prairie are becoming present, low and horizontal and immense. A farm appears for a moment on the right side of the train, the buildings dark against the lighter sky, a barn that is clearly large, a house, a single light in an upstairs window where someone is already awake and moving in the dark before the morning comes. Farmers. They are always up before the trains, before the cities, before the light. They are up when the dark is still absolute and the temperature is at its lowest, and the only reason to be out of a warm bed is the animals who need feeding, and the milk that needs pulling, and the day that will not wait for the sun. The farmers in the farmhouses along this track have been awake for an hour before the Pullman Limited comes through. They heard it. You always hear a train, and the particular train, the specific morning schedule, becomes in a farming life part of the clock of the day, a marker you don't consciously attend to anymore, but that is there. The way the sound of church bells is there in a village. There and expected and noticed only when it does not come. The train passes the farm and the farm is gone, and the next miles are fields, and then another cluster of farmstead lights, and then more fields, and the light is genuinely growing now. The eastern sky above the low Illinois horizon beginning to transition from deep grey to the particular shade that comes before colour, a lightening that is not yet light. A preparation. The Adirondack is 40 minutes from Chicago. The car is beginning to wake. Not all at once, not in a rush, but in the quiet incremental way of a space shifting from sleep to wakefulness. A curtain pulled back here, a pair of feet visible descending a berth ladder there, the small sounds of people beginning to move after a night of stillness. Someone is making their way to the dressing room. Someone else has pulled back the curtain of their lower berth and is sitting on the edge of it in the particular private moment of a person who is awake but not yet public, looking at nothing in particular, holding themselves quietly for a moment before the day begins. Thomas is moving through the car. He has been moving through the car for the last 20 minutes in the preparation that arrival requires, smoothing the seatbacks in the berths as they are vacated, folding and stowing the bedding, converting the berth back to the daytime seating configuration. He works backward through the car, making up each berth as it is left, so that the car will be restored to its daytime form by the time the last passenger departs at the platform. The woman who was reading has already gone to the dressing room and emerged 20 minutes later completely dressed, hair arranged, hat in place. She is one of those travellers who maintains her standards of presentation even at 5 in the morning, in a railcar dressing room not much larger than a wardrobe, and Thomas notes this with the private respect he extends to people who bring a certain seriousness to whatever they are doing, regardless of whether the situation strictly requires it. Mrs. Comstock is up, also dressed, sitting in the converted seat of her lower berth with the morning paper, the Chicago Tribune, which James has put out in the dining car, and which Thomas has placed one copy of outside each berth for the passengers who had asked for it the night before, which was 4 of them, Mrs. Comstock among them. She is reading the first page with the focused attention of someone reviewing the state of the world before deciding how to operate in it. The young attorney is still in his berth, awake but lying still, watching the sky outside his window change. He can see it from up here in the upper berth, the wide flat Illinois sky turning from grey to the pale gold that precedes a November sunrise, a colour without warmth but not without beauty, the particular quality of early light in a flat landscape where the sky is so large and the land so low that the horizon has no interruption and the light comes all at once everywhere. He will remember this, he thinks. He will remember this specific sky, this specific morning light, the ceiling of the Pullman berth 14 inches from his nose, and the gold light outside, and the sound of the train bringing him toward the city, and the life that may or may not be waiting there for him. He will remember it in the way that first times fix themselves in memory, with a particular clarity that later repetitions never quite achieve. He is right about this. He will remember it for the rest of his life, and much later, when he is old and the Pullman cars he rode in his youth have been replaced by something faster and less beautiful, he will sometimes describe it to his children and his grandchildren, the way the light came, the ceiling, the sound of the train, and they will listen with the polite attention of people who love someone and are tolerating a story they have heard before. The train is slowing, not much, not yet, but the rhythm of the wheels has shifted, the intervals between the clicks lengthening slightly as the speed drops, and the motion has changed its quality, become more deliberate, the way the movement of any large thing becomes more deliberate when it is approaching something. Through the window the darkness is resolving, and on the horizon to the south a faint reddish glow is visible, low on the sky, not the sun. The sun will rise in the east in another half hour, but the industrial light of the city, the blast furnaces and the foundries and the yards, the constant burn of a city that does not sleep, that produces its own perpetual light from the work that never stops. That glow has been there since 4 in the morning, for passengers who are awake to see it, a feature of the Chicago approach that regulars know to look for, the way you know to look for the first lights of any city you are approaching in the dark. It grows as you approach, and it separates, over time, into its component parts, the brighter points that are individual sources of light, factory windows and yard lamps and street lights, distinguishable now from the general glow, the city resolving from a weather condition into a specific place. James has had a cup of coffee in the dining car. He holds it standing up, reading the order list from last night that he will need to reconcile before handing off the car to the Chicago service crew. The number of meals served, the bottles opened, the inventory changes, the tips received in the dining room that he will distribute to the kitchen staff per the arrangement they have, an arrangement that is not formal and is not recognized by the Pullman Company, and that he maintains because without it the kitchen crew would have nothing to show for the night. The chef is at his range, eggs cooking, sausage in the pan, coffee in the urn that takes up the rear corner of the kitchen and that produces a coffee that people who have tasted it tend to remember. Good train coffee is a specific accomplishment that requires understanding the altitude, which is not relevant here, and the water, which is the water in the Pullman car's storage tank having a particular mineral quality that affects the flavor, and the grind and the timing and the particular balance of strength and bitterness that a person who has been on a train all night and needs to be functional within 45 minutes requires. The chef has been making this coffee for 6 years and he has the balance right and he knows he has it right and he is quietly proud of this. The dining car is filling up. The early risers, the ones who could not sleep or who slept quickly and woke early and are now ready to be in the world, are arriving one by one in the morning's pale gold light and sitting down and being served coffee and being allowed, if they want it, to order their breakfast. And some of them are watching out the windows at the city beginning to appear, and some of them are reading their papers, and some of them are simply sitting with their coffee in the particular morning quiet of people who are gathering themselves before the day requires them. Mrs. Comstock is having her eggs. Robert Langley is still in his berth, watching the sky. The woman with the red book, her name is Clara, and I should have told you this earlier, and I am telling you now. Clara is in the dining car with coffee and a hot cake, and she is watching out the window at the city appearing, and she is thinking about her school in Dayton and her students, and the lesson she has planned for Monday morning, about the French Revolution, which she finds genuinely fascinating and which she has been trying for 3 years to make genuinely fascinating for 12-year-olds, with the partial success that this project typically achieves. She is thinking about the way certain facts, presented in the right order in the right light, can do what years of rote learning cannot, can make a child feel the shape of history, the way it was not inevitable, the way it could have gone differently at 100 points, the way the people inside it did not know they were inside history because they were just living their lives and trying not to be afraid. She is a good teacher. She knows this. She does not say this out loud. She finishes her hot cake. The train is in the outskirts of Chicago now, the farmland replaced by the first suburban buildings, houses close together and closer to the tracks. The back gardens of ordinary Chicago families visible through the window in the November morning light, washing lines and vegetable gardens put to bed for the winter, and sheds and the occasional dog, aware of the train and unbothered by it because this train goes past every morning and has always gone past every morning and always will. The city crowds around the tracks as the train moves inward, the houses becoming denser and the spaces between them narrowing and the buildings becoming larger. And then the first factory walls appear, brick and industrial, and then the elevated railway structure above a street, and the streets themselves, and people on the streets in the early morning, men with their hats pulled down against the cold, a woman with a basket on her arm, a boy on a bicycle moving fast. Chicago. The smell comes first, through whatever cracks are available in the well-sealed Pullman car. The coal smoke and the stockyards and the river, and the particular urban smell of a city in winter, the smell of cold stone and iron, and the collective residue of 1,000,000 lives. Then the sound changes, the open country sounds replaced by the echo and the clatter of a city, other trains nearby, the sounds of yards and engines and the general industrial roar of a place that is continuously, insistently, energetically alive. And then the station. LaSalle Street Station at 5:30 in the morning is already busy, because stations in the era of rail travel are never not busy, because the trains run at all hours and the people who meet them and see them off and work in them run at all hours too. And the station in a city like Chicago is less a building than a permanent condition of arrival and departure, a place defined by movement in the same way a river is defined by flow. The Adirondack pulls in slowly, the engine hissing steam, the platform sliding past the windows, and the passengers who are awake and dressed come to the end of the car and look out at the platform, orienting themselves, finding their city. Thomas is at the door. He has their bags in order. He knows what is going where. He knows who needs a porter to meet them at the platform, and who is being met, and who is taking a cab, because he asked last night as part of the evening's information gathering, and he remembers. He opens the door when the train stops fully and places the step, and stands at the top of it to help passengers down. And he says good morning, and he says the platform is dry, take care on the step, and he says welcome to Chicago, and he means all of it in the professional sense, and some of it in the personal sense, and the line between them is, after 7 years, genuinely blurry. The passengers file out, Mrs. Comstock first, bag already in hand, moving with the efficiency of a person who has done this many times, then the cattleman unhurried, hat already on, looking around the platform with the easy orientation of a man who is comfortable in most settings. Then Clara, with her small valise and her red book tucked under her arm, looking up at the station roof with the expression of someone who finds buildings interesting. Then the others, one by one, the man with the bad back who straightens on the platform and takes a careful breath and feels that it is better than he expected, and the retired banker who steps down and looks for the face of his wife and does not see it yet and tries not to let the absence feel ominous, and the young woman who is going to be married in 3 days, who steps onto the Chicago platform and takes a breath, and the cold air of the city fills her lungs and she thinks, I am here. I am actually here. Robert Langley is last. He comes out of the car with his leather valise and he steps down onto the platform and he stands there for a moment, looking up at the station, getting his bearings. The station is large, much larger than anything in Brooklyn, and the ceiling is high and crossed with beams, and the morning light comes in through the high windows and falls on the stone floor in long rectangles that the departing passengers walk through without noticing. He notices. He stands there with his valise and the letter of introduction in his pocket and his carefully folded suit waiting for the hotel, and he looks up at the light coming through the windows, and he thinks this is something, this is really something. Thomas watches him from the door of the car. He has seen this before, many times, the first-time arrivals, the people stepping into a new city with the quality of attention that only the unfamiliar produces, seeing the light that the regulars have stopped seeing because they have seen it so many times that it has become simply the light of LaSalle Street Station at 5:30 in the morning, neutral and functional, a means of seeing and nothing more. He does not say anything to Robert Langley. His job is complete. The bags are on the platform, the berths are made up. The car is ready for the Chicago service crew. He has done his work. He steps back inside the Adirondack and begins, with the methodical attention that the work requires and that 7 years have made as natural as breathing, to prepare the car for its next journey. The platform empties. The station echoes with the sounds of other trains, other arrivals, other departures. Chicago receives these people the way cities receive people, efficiently, without ceremony, immediately incorporating them into the stream of its own motion. The Adirondack sits on the track at LaSalle Street Station. The steam has stopped. The engine idles somewhere at the front of the consist. The interior of the car, restored to its daytime configuration, is empty and quiet, the velvet seats waiting, the carpet swept, the white linen already being loaded by the supply crew for the return service. 960 miles, 16 hours give or take, a car full of people, each of them carrying an entire world, moving through the dark from one city to another in a space that was built to make the crossing feel less like an ordeal and more like an experience. A space that was also a system of labor and hierarchy and racial injustice running under the beauty the way a river runs under ice, present and moving and absolutely real. This is what it was. This is what you rode on when you rode the Pullman Limited from New York to Chicago in the year 1888. The beauty and the system together, the cherrywood paneling and the standing rib roast and the ice cream service and the shoes shined while you slept, and the man who shined them, sitting in his chair at the end of the car, awake all night, answering to a name that was not his. His name was Thomas. He was 34 years old. He was going home to his rooms on State Street, and his book, and the letter he owed his mother. He deserved his rest, and you in your bed tonight, in whatever year and place you actually inhabit, in whatever warmth and stillness you have constructed for yourself against the dark, you also deserve your rest. The night has been long, and the country you have travelled through has been complicated and beautiful in the way that real things are beautiful, imperfectly, with their history showing. Let it settle around you now. Let the warmth of the blankets be the warmth of the blankets. Let the sound of whatever outside your window is moving, wind or traffic or rain or the particular silence of a winter night. Let it be the sound the wheels made on the rails, steady and patient and carrying you through the dark. You are not going anywhere tonight. You are already where you are. The journey is the one happening in the dark behind your eyes, the long, patient one, the one that moves at exactly the right speed through the middle of the night and arrives where you are going just when you are ready to be there. The train is a long way off now, in history, in time, moving through a country that no longer quite exists in the form it had in 1888. The Pullman Palace Car Company will be dissolved in 1947, after 80 years of operation, after the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, organized by A. Philip Randolph, built out of the labor of men like Thomas, wins its first contract in 1937 after 12 years of organizing, and the landscape of the work shifts slowly into something more just. Though justice in this country tends to arrive in increments too small to feel like justice in the moment, and the men who built the Union did not live to see the full extent of what they built. But the trains kept running, and the night kept being the night. And somewhere on a rail line right now, at this hour, a train is moving through the dark of whatever season it is, moving through the countryside with its lights on and its passengers warm, and the sound of the wheels is the same sound it has always been, the basic rhythm of the thing, steady and patient and going. Let that sound be with you now if you want it. The wheels on the rails in the dark, the particular quality of warmth that a good blanket in a cold season provides, the sense of being carried somewhere by something that knows the way. The night is quiet. The train moves. You are already somewhere safe, already held, already on your way to the morning that is coming exactly when it always comes, at exactly the right hour, with the light arriving the way light arrives in the Midwest in November, low and pale and without urgency, spreading across the flat land in all directions, touching the bare fields and the farmhouses and the station platforms and the faces of the people just beginning to move in the first cold hour, gently without announcement. Sleep well, friend. The shoes will be ready in the morning. The coffee will be exactly right. The conductor knows where you are going, and the track is clear, and the night is holding everything carefully until the morning comes to take it. Good night. One last thing. Before the night is truly over, there is a particular quality to the silence of a rail car after everyone has left. It is not the silence of an empty room in an ordinary building, which is simply the absence of sound. It is a silence that contains the memory of movement. The car has been vibrating for 16 hours, every beam and panel and rivet resonating with the motion of the train, and now it is still, stationary at the platform, and the stillness is a new thing, a recent thing, and the car remembers being in motion the way a bell remembers having been rung. You can feel this if you know to pay attention to it. Stand in an empty railway car that has just arrived, and the air still holds something, some trace of the journey, some residue of all the miles. Thomas knows this. He has stood in empty cars many times and felt it. It is nothing supernatural. It is physics, probably, or simply the mind finding patterns in sensory data that the body has been accumulating all night. But it is real. The stillness after motion has a texture. The silence after 16 hours of sound has a quality. The car at rest on the platform at LaSalle Street Station in the early morning, emptied of its passengers and its stories and its noise and its small dramas, is not simply an empty car. It is a car that has been somewhere, and the somewhere is still in it. He puts his hand on the cherry wood panelling near the vestibule door. The wood is warm from the night's heating, from the proximity of all those sleeping bodies generating their steady human warmth. The grain of it is smooth under his palm. He has touched this particular panel in this particular place 1,000 times. He knows the way the grain runs, the slight ridge where two planks were joined, the almost invisible place where the finish has worn at the edge. He takes his hand away. Outside, Chicago is fully awake now. The morning has arrived and done what mornings do. The day will be what the day will be. Thomas picks up his bag from the small compartment where it waited all night and walks out onto the platform and into the city. The train is behind him, still and warm. Good night.